going to turn it over to our director. If you could please introduce yourself and who you have with you. You all are recognized.
Thank you, Chair Porterfield, members of council. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today and talk to you about the pay plan study that we had conducted with Mercer and then our proposed pay plan for the FY26 budget. Also just noting that the pay plan resolutions have been filed and should be available in the Legislative Information Center that you guys have. So I just wanted to make sure you could see the full pay charts related to the changes we're talking about today. My name is Shannon Hall. I'm the HR Director. With me today, we have members of the HR team and our lead consultant from Mercer who helped us perform the compensation study. We have Assistant Director Mike Taylor. And then from our compensation team, we have Leslie Schuster and Jenna Smith. And then we also have Leah Santos from Mercer, who was our lead consultant who assisted us with the study and then the proposed changes on the pay plan that are before you. With that, I am going to just a little by way of background. The council probably recalls last year we came and talked to you about the fact that we had a pay plan study underway. It's been about 10 years since we have engaged an outside third-party consultant. Mercer is a national leader in compensation. It's one of their specialties. They assisted us with this study. We do study and make recommendations and adjustments to our pay plan every year in-house. But this was a larger, more robust study that studied even our compensation practices and made recommendations to be incorporated into our pay plan. So all of those have been incorporated into what we're presenting today. And we have in the past years talked a lot about the pay plan process, how it works legislatively, the roles that we have, recommending appropriate pay. Obviously, the mayor recommends a budget. The council gets to finalize and make funding determinations related to the budget. None of that part has changed. We can talk about that as we need to through the presentation, but we've really focused today on the pay plan, what's staying the same, what is changing, and then some of the results that came from Mercer really centered around some of the pain points that you had heard in previous years around slotting and whether or not we should use, what metrics we should use for recommending COLAs or across the board. Those were high priorities for the council. They had passed a resolution last year asking that we take careful consideration when we were studying those issues. So we've really centered a lot of our presentation around those items since those were of particular interest to council. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie Schuster, and she's going to start our presentation. Obviously, plenty of time for questions as well at the end.
Thank you, Shannon. Just by way of a little bit more background, the pay plans, as you've seen them for the last many years, have been in their current form since about 1993. And these are pay grades that have 10 steps set up the way they are now since 1993. We had another kind of major change in 1997 when we introduced open range pay grades. And these are pay ranges that just have a minimum and a maximum and don't have defined steps in between. Employees can be paid anywhere within that range. Other than that, we have had minor changes most every year since then, but it's been about 30 years since we have had a major change to the design or structure of our pay plans. In 2023, as Shannon mentioned, we engaged with Mercer HR Consulting to begin a large comprehensive study of our compensation plans, our benefit plans, and our policies and practices related to how we administer the pay plans. In 2023, also as Shannon mentioned, Metro Council asked us to specifically look at two priority issues of the practice of looking at the Consumer Price Index in relation to setting pay adjustments to our pay plans and the slotting of how we implement pay adjustments when the pay plans change. And we're going to discuss kind of our deep dives on those two issues in this presentation. Anytime that we do make changes to our pay plans, we are always trying to keep these three things in mind to make sure that our plans are fair and equitable amongst all the employees that are covered by these plans. We need to be able to recruit and retain employees so that we are offering competitive market rates. We do want to be an employer of choice in Nashville, so employees do want to work with Metro and stay with us. And we need to be able to maintain sufficient staffing so we can offer our services to the public. We also need to be fiscally responsible in how we recommend these plans so that they're able to be funded every year as designed and provide that sustainable pay growth for our employees. And just to emphasize that when we are recommending changes to our plans, our focus is always on recommending appropriate pay for our jobs. We look at what similar jobs in the marketplace, what the market is paying those jobs, what do we need to be offering for those jobs so that we're able to recruit and retain employees. A couple things to highlight that are not changing with how we structure our plans going forward and how we are recommending changes. We are still recommending to have a merit-based structure. We still have pay grades with steps. We still have open ranges, and employees move through those ranges with merit increases. So with acceptable performance, they move to the next step every year. For open range, those merit increases are how they move up through the range dependent on performance. We will also be recommending across the board increases to our plans. These are increases that raise all the pay structures and increases that all employees receive. This is how we have done pay plan changes in the past. Employees who expect 2 different components of pay increase every year with an across the board and then a merit increase as they move up in the range, and that will not change. We would still be recommending both types of pay increases as part of these pay plans. Some of the things that are changing. All of the pay ranges are increasing for all of the pay ranges in the plans, all jobs that are compensated under these plans. And this is increasing our pay range relative to the market. So when we are hiring, most of our jobs are hired at the minimum at step 1 or lower in that open range. We are hiring closer to that market rate. So this is meant to increase our competitiveness relative to the market to enhance our recruitment and retention. We are also adding additional steps. So currently the plans have 10 steps. New plans have 15 steps. The steps 11 through 15 are adding additional growth beyond where the current plans reach a maximum. So these are rates that are higher than the plans currently go today. All of the pay plans are changing to annual step increases for all the types of jobs. Currently and historically in our plans, some of them would be eligible for a step increase every other year as you get higher in the pay range. So steps 5 through 9, you would be eligible to receive those every other year. All the steps in these plans would be annual across all the jobs. The merit increase is changing to be a 2% difference between each step and a 2% merit budget for open range. We are changing our slotting practice, which we'll talk about again a little bit later, so that when we do implement these market adjustments, employees will maintain their same step in the range. So if they're at step 3, their range gets increased, they will go to the new step 3. They're at step 6, they go to the new step 6. And our last change highlighted here is our focus on total pay growth for our plans relative to what pay growth is happening in the market, so we can recommend changes to our pay plans that are meeting or exceeding the pay changes in the market, so we maintain our competitive position. This slide is kind of showing visually what is happening with all of the pay grades. So on top, you'll see a step plan. This is changing from 10 steps to 15, and you'll see everything shifts higher. So all the pay ranges are increasing. The minimum is increasing between about 7 or 8%, depending on the type of pay schedule it is today. The maximum is increasing between 8 and 9%. And employees are keeping their same step to slot to these new higher pay grades. So you'll see that for at the minimum, going from step 1 to the new step 1 would be about a 7 to 8% increase. If you are at step 5, going to step 5, that's going to be a little bit less of an increase. The increase does adjust as you move up. And then if you're at the top of the range, it would be close to a 1 or 2% increase. And then everyone is eligible to move to the next step also next year. So with this plan, the increases are going to vary among employees depending on what step they're at today. And that would range between about 9% if you're at the bottom of the range, 3% if you're at the top. So employees that are at the bottom are the ones that are lower relative to market. They're getting a higher percent to slot to these new grades. Employees that are at the top of the range, which are higher relative to the market, are getting at least 3%, but a little less than the employees that are at the bottom. The open range grades, these are the 2 grades at the bottom. Open range grades are also increasing. And to be consistent with the implementation for the step plans, we are implementing the increases for the open range employees in a similar way so that if they are low in the range, it's closer to a 9% total increase. If they're high in the range, it's closer to a 3% total increase. But all of those changes working together means that every employee has increased pay in these new plans for next year and going forward. And I want to do a little bit of a deep dive into what the implementation actually looks like for these plans for employees that are on the different steps. And they look a little bit different depending on the pay schedule today, because the pay schedules are structured a little bit differently. You'll see a couple of different groups. This group, the standard range, correctional officers, and emergency communications, these have a similar implementation impact. And you can see at step 1, going to the new step 1, that's almost 8% increase, 7.85. Everyone's eligible for a merit increase next year, which would add another 2%. So that total for the year is just at about 10%. And then we have almost 400 employees at step 1 in these plans. So you can see for employees at each step what that implementation impact is for what the increase is to their pay and how many employees it affects. And you can see that there are a lot of employees that are here at the bottom of the range that are getting these larger increases with this design change to the plans. Next is police and fire. These 2 pay schedules are set up a little bit differently from those standard ranges, so the increase is a little bit different, but the same trend. We are designing these so they are consistent across all of these groups going forward. And you can see that at the lower steps, it's a higher increase. And then at the higher steps, they're still getting at least 3% total increase. And you can see the number of employees that are at each step. And I want to highlight the folks that are at step 10 today are not eligible for any more steps in the current plan. So they are slotting into these new grades at step 12, 13, so that they will have additional growth going forward for the next couple of years where they wouldn't otherwise. And we do have a fair number of police and fire employees that are reaching that step 10 this year. For our trades and labor chart, this one is a little bit tricky and a little bit more complicated to explain. We do have another change to the trades and labor pay grades. We're consolidating our trades and labor charts. Currently, there's 3 separate charts for worker jobs, leader jobs, and supervisor jobs that we're consolidating into one. So all the increase is going to differ depending on what schedule you're coming from, what grade you're coming from, and what step you're coming from. But this shows the range of increase across all those current 3 plans into the new consolidated trades schedule, what that range of increase is. And there are not employees at every grade, at every step. So this is the range if there were. So you can see here that most trades employees are at the lower end of their pay grade currently. So these design changes of this pay plan benefits the trades and labor employees more than the average employee because of the consolidation of the trades and labor chart and because most of them are low in the pay range currently, so they're getting these larger increases. Now, for the open ranges, these are the ones that don't have steps, so we're not necessarily slotting employees to a step in their new grade, but we wanted to handle these employees in a consistent and fair way, similar to how the implementation is for the employees on steps. So to be consistent with them, what we did is just behind the scenes, dividing the current open range grades into 10 equal parts, and then whichever part your salary falls in is your position in the range. So in this example, where the arrow is pointing to at that segment 5, if your current salary is within that small range, then you're in segment 5 and you would get a 4.3% increase to move to these new grades. And we set it up similarly to the steps where if you're lowest in the range at or near the minimum, that'd be a 7% increase. If you are highest in the range at or near the maximum, it would be close to the 1%. And then we assume everyone is eligible for a 2% merit increase. So that total increase ranges between about 9 and about 3%. The remainder of these positions in the range are just distributed equally between that 7% and the 1%. Next, we want to focus on those 2 priority issues that Metro Council requested we study in this pay study, which were how to look at consumer price index relative to market adjustments and how we implement market increases for how we slot employees in. First, we're going to talk about the metrics for recommending those general increases to the plans, and I'm going to actually turn it over to Leah Santos at Mercer to talk through the next couple of slides.
Thanks, Leslie. Okay. Right. So although Mercer was engaged with Metro for the entire study, and we were definitely heavily involved in everything that Leslie's talked to up to this point, we wanted to make sure that we presented on some of the information that was within the priority issues based on the resolutions that were asked for us to take a deeper dive into. One of those was really, what are the indicators that you typically would utilize and take into consideration when you're determining your increases over time in pay? So we have on the left-hand side of the page, cost of living, which is your current practice. And cost of living is an economic indicator that really focuses on external elements, which are the local housing market, taxes, consumable goods. So cost of living does influence and track with cost of labor, but it is not a one-to-one relationship. As local prices increase, cost of labor also will increase over time, but cost of living is not typically a meaningful part of establishing compensation, while it does impact compensation in certain cases. So here on the page, we have, for example, one-time cost of living stipends or adjustments when involuntarily relocating employees, and also living wage standards for the low-wage workforce, where hourly rates are indexed to the cost of living, which Leslie will also talk about that later in the presentation as well. Some of the cost of living sources that are typically used are CPI, CPU, and most of this information, of course, you can get on BLS, through BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics online. On the right-hand side of the page, we have what we at Mercer see as a more common practice, and that is looking at cost of labor when you're looking at adjustments to compensation. Cost of labor is the competitive wage paid for a particular job in a geographic area, and it is primarily dependent on local unemployment rates and the supply and demand of labor. So here we're really looking at the value of a job in a market and how that changes over time. Companies utilize cost of labor to inform geographic differentials to manage pay in certain geographic areas. And these differentials are used in managing compensation ranges in several reasons. Limited local market data. So for some roles, we might be looking at local market data because there could be variability or unavailable data for some roles in certain areas. So we have to look at this data to adjust those geographically. Also, cost of labor can also help with the ease of administration for compensation structures because it can be less volatile than some of the other economic indicators. And also workforce planning. So it really looks at the cost of labor for roles. And again, it's really related to the supply and demand of labor in a local area, in a specific geography. Some of the recommended labor sources that we typically see used they're called compensation planning surveys, and they're really released by many human resources professional organizations or associations. So Mercer is on here on the list. Also, the Society for Human Resource Management, World at Work, which are two of the largest human resources associations in the United States. And then W2W, which is a similar global human resources consulting firm, similar to Mercer. Also, another source of this information is ECI. So based on cost of living, cost of labor, again, they are related, but not the same. We did make several recommendations. One of those is to adjust your pay structures based on a cost of labor measure rather than cost of living. Utilizing a multi-year approach when looking at cost of living data trends rather than a single year review. Again, there can be some volatility in this data. And so typically we look at like a 2 to 3 year average just to kind of keep that more smooth. And then communicating pay adjustments as an across the board increase rather than communicating an across the board or a COLA and a merit increase separately. We felt that this could be hard to explain, hard to communicate, and we typically see it communicated more as one number rather than broken into two different numbers and then added together. Market adjustments are a result of a detailed market assessment and should be communicated separately to ensure they're not expected every year. So some of the information that Leslie was talking about earlier, when we're talking about an actual market adjustment at that job level, because we've done a comprehensive study, should be communicated separately from this across-the-board adjustment that you would recommend and typically receive every year, depending on a variety of factors, just so that the larger increase that might be a result from a comprehensive study is not an expectation every year.
Different measures that Leah mentioned as recommended sources for data on the cost of labor. One of those is the ECI, or the Employment Cost Index. So this index is collected also by Bureau of Labor Statistics, just like the Consumer Price Index is, but it is measuring the change in labor costs to employers, or what it costs employers to have and compensate employees. This data is showing us how actual wages and salaries have changed over the past quarter, over the past 12 months. This metric is released quarterly by Bureau of Labor Statistics. And it's measuring actual pay growth, which is what we want to be measuring when we are recommending pay growth for our jobs and our pay plans. The other metric that Mercer recommends are these compensation planning surveys or salary planning surveys, salary budget surveys. And those are indicating how other employers are projecting their salary budgets will be increasing for the next cycle. So this is more of a projection, a prediction of how our peers are going to be increasing their pay, which is interesting to us, so we can make changes to our pay coming up to maintain our position. So looking at that projection also allows us to make sure that we're not always catching up to what has already happened. So we do plan to utilize both of those sources, the look back at what has actually changed, the look forward of what employers are say they're planning to do, so that we recommend pay increases in general to our plans that are keeping up with what is happening in the market. And we are comparing apples to apples, wage growth to wage growth. And since we have been used to talking about CPI, we wanted to show what those trends have been of CPI, Consumer Price Index, and the ECI, Employment Cost Index, have been year to year. And this is going back to 2001. You can see here what the annual CPI and ECI was. You can see that ECI generally for most years is higher, not every year, but most years it's higher. And CPI does occasionally go very low, sometimes below zero, sometimes approaching zero, and the employment cost index never really does. You don't really see wages not increasing at all. And you can see the total here for, I mean, this is a large time span, but the ECI has outpaced inflation, or the CPI, over this time span, and even a little bit over the last 6 years. And you can see that compared to what Metro's pay growth has been for the last 6 years. We have outpaced both of those with our recent pay increases. And these increases are higher than we have seen for I don't know how long. It has been kind of a necessary correction to get Metro's pay competitive with who we're really competing against in our local market for different types of jobs. So that, along with the changes for this year, are really improving our competitiveness so that our rates are meeting or exceeding. We're able to hire people close to those market rates and improve our recruitment and retention. This next chart, you can kind of see the more closely the trend of what CPI, which is the blue, and the employment cost index, which is the orange, how volatile CPI is. It does occasionally dip down very low. ECI really doesn't. ECI is historically just more stable. And the main point is that the employment cost index is measuring what we want to measure to be recommending appropriate pay and pay changes to our plans. This chart is showing how we will use this data for how we recommend what these across the board increases are to our plans going forward. So when those market metrics, employment cost index, cost of labor, salary planning surveys, we have 3 different scenarios here. So if the pay in the market we're seeing is increasing 4%, these new plans as they're designed would have merit increases. So these are the step increases, or the budget for open range merit increases would be consistent at 2% each year. And then the variable component is that across the board. So if we're trying to match a 4% market pay increase, we would have 2% for our merit and recommend a 2% across the board to match that 4% market growth. If the market growth was 6, our merit increases again would be consistent at 2, and we would recommend a 4% across the board so that employees' total increases would be 6 to match that market. And then should market pay growth be stagnant, if it was 1%, we would still recommend our merit at 2. Employees would still receive those step increases to move up in the range, still receive the merit increases in open ranges. And in that case, we would not recommend an across the board. So we would still have at least that 2% merit growth for employees in our plans. Yes.
These are just illustrative purposes. I just want to make that clear. We said scenarios. We're not locked into those scenarios. Just whatever the pay growth is, we would be recommending the delta as part of the across the board. So just doing that more for illustrative purposes.
Thank you, Shannon. And then just to touch on kind of our change in just how we are, the terminology we're using for these general increases. So we're used to talking about COLAs, cost of living adjustments. Cost of living adjustments and across the board increases are both general increases to pay structures that are employees all receive that same increase. And we are still recommending this type of general increase to our plans to increase all the grade structures and increase employees' pay subsequently. We are just changing our terminology just to reflect that our focus is on pay growth relative to market pay growth to maintain our competitive position, not necessarily the matching an inflation measure or a cost of living measure. So we are still recommending these general increases. We're just changing our terminology to call them an across the board instead of a COLA. Now, that's not to say that inflation will never be any kind of an influence in how we recommend pay plans. We do monitor the living wage so that we set a minimum hourly rate for the lowest level jobs in our plans. And the metric we use to do that is the MIT living wage for Davidson County for a single adult. Mercer's recommendation, we look at a 3-year average to smooth out any volatility there. And any increase in this metric is we will need to meet to recommend the floor or the lowest levels of our pay structures. And this living wage is going to be largely influenced by inflation, and the cost of goods and services is really what drives MIT's recommendations for what living wages are in different areas. So we will be, next year, we know that that number is going to be higher, and we will need to address it at our lower levels of our trades and our clerical administrative support jobs. So we will also maintain the structure of our plans and the hierarchy so that that rising tide at the bottom will float all the boats. So we will be looking at that living wage metric to make adjustments in our recommendations going forward still. The second priority issue that council did ask us to do a deep dive in our study on with Mercer was the slotting issue. And I just want to go through this one just to explain how the previous method was and what the new recommended method is. Previously, when we had market adjustments to our jobs, say a job was upgraded from a grade 5 to a grade 6. Employees would be slotted into that new higher grade at a step amount that would give them at least what the COLA was or what that across the board was. So if it was 3% that year, employees would slot to whatever step in this new grade gave them at least a 3% increase. And you can see that sometimes this would cause some compression. So you can see in this example, employees at step 1, 2, and 3 are all slotting to step 1. And then employees at step 4 are going to step 2, step 5 to step 3. So they're going to a lower numbered step, but that step is at least 3% higher. It is higher pay, but it's a different step than they were on before. And this did cause some compression in our grades, especially in a year, if a year had a lower across the board increase and a high grade increase, that would cause more compression. Mercer's recommendation for us is that the best practice is for employees to maintain their same position in the range or their same step when there are market adjustments like this. So the new method would be employees maintain their same step. If there's an upgrade, if you're at step 1, go to step 1, step 2, go to step 2, and so on. You would maintain your same step in the range, and employees in these jobs that are receiving these upgrades would receive that higher market adjustment. So we do plan to implement that recommendation in our pay plan adjustments going forward. We wanted to talk a little bit about how we are communicating all these changes to our departments and our employees. We have set up a new intranet site on Metro SharePoint. So this site is available to any Metro employee with login credentials. You'd be able to visit this on Inside Metro or the Metro SharePoint site. You go to the Human Resources page, there's a new link to classification and compensation. And we have a lot of resources there for employees, for HR coordinators in the various departments, and managers and supervisors in departments can access this to learn about these changes specifically. There's a page focused only on these pay plan changes. There's pages for employees and HR coordinators with resources just about our compensation plans in general, frequently asked questions that all employees can access, and we will, be updating this in the future as different issues come up. We've also sent out compensation change announcements. These got mailed to employees' homes. These were sent out to full-time employees that are compensated under these plans to explain in general what these changes are, how it would benefit them, what the likely impact to them is, depending on if they're on a step plan or open range. Directs them to our SharePoint site. There's a QR code there they can scan and go directly to our page on Inside Metro. They can see the other resources we have. But this was a really good tool that Mercer helped us develop to help us communicate what these changes are and how they'll benefit employees. And I want to highlight the 3 boxes over on the lower left. This is really what ties all of these changes together for these plans and makes them a really good benefit to employees and sets us up for success going forward. All these pay ranges increasing, employee pay is increasing for every employee, and employees are maintaining their same step to move to the new charts. So that is increasing pay for every employee, and any further increases or adjustments to plans going forward would be off of these higher rates. The increases for this year are going to range between about 3% and 9%. On average for most of the employees. I think the average increase across the whole population on these plans is almost 7%. And these new pay plans and practices are meant to ensure that we can continue to offer competitive pay, provide pay growth consistently and reliably for employees, and provide a structure that's sustainable and able to be funded year after year so we can maintain pay growth through these plans for our employees. And just to recap, summary of the changes, the increased pay ranges and the additional steps are benefiting employees low in the range by receiving those higher increases. The employees high in the range are benefiting with having more growth than they would under the current plans. Annual step increases for all jobs is ensuring that our tenured employees would be eligible for those merit increases every year instead of being in a every other year situation where they may not receive that every year. The consistent 2% merit increases across all the plans on those higher pay ranges are allowing for more sustainable pay growth and allowing us to be more adaptable in recommending those across the board increases in any changing market conditions. The step-for-step slotting is a big change for us that will have a big impact on employees whenever we have these market adjustments. That is addressing that priority issue that employees had and reducing that compression that can happen when there are those increases. So employees are maintaining their same position and they don't bunch up at the bottom. And then that focus on the total pay growth as a best practice to maintain our market competitiveness. We are trying to compare apples to apples, look at what is happening with pay for similar jobs in the market so that we can match that and maintain our position where we want to be and enable us to continue to recruit and retain employees.
I'm so sorry. I was waiting on I'm sorry, my bad. We will open it up for questions. We'll start with Vice Chair Toombs if she would like to be recognized, and then we'll go with committee members, and then we will open it up to other people. So I see Councilmember Soror as a committee member. I see Councilmember Coopin as well as Councilmember Nash, and I see Councilmember Webb as a committee member. So we will, and Councilmember Gamble as a committee member. So we'll start with Vice Chair Toombs. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. On the slide that showed the total percentage increase in pay for the steps, and I think you explained this, I just didn't quite catch it. Like step 7 to 8 was 4.51%, then from step 9 to 10 was 3.8%. Can you explain?
Slide 7. Yes. Sorry, we're putting it up. I'm
Why-
just bringing it back up. This one.
Yes, why it goes up and then back down?
So we are slotting employees into their same step in the new range,
Okay.
but we want them to have at least a minimum increase. So with the change in the design, going from 10 to 15 steps and going from 3% steps to 2% steps, that's necessarily going to be a differential in the increase employees get to move from one to the other. So at some point when you get up higher than step 7, if they went to step 8 in the new plan, that would not be enough of an increase to meet that minimum threshold. So they'll slot into step 9 instead of step 8. And step 9 would slot into step 10. Step 10 would slot into step 11.
Okay.
So we're trying to ensure employees get at least that minimum total 3% for the year.
I see it now. Okay, I see that. And my second question, looking at the slide where you showed the ECI percentage, it was the scenario slide. Okay. So using For the pay plan that is proposed for fiscal year 26, are you using the 2024 ECI number? Would that be the number to use? Is there a 2025?
We used the 2024 ECI and the latest salary planning data that we had to recommend those changes.
It's a blended rate.
So if I'm understanding from this chart, so the 2024 ECI number was 4.1. The fixed merit increase is 2%. So the across the board using this chart would be 2%, right?
Councilmember Toombs, if I can explain, because we didn't show you this level of detail, we were really trying to stay focused. We wanted to create a lot of space for questions and deep
Right.
dive what you needed. The way that one of the recommendations from Mercer, so we had already said, we're doing a blended rate. We're looking immediately behind us in ECI, and then looking at those survey planning tools at what's immediately coming up. So we're not falling behind. We're looking directly behind what's happened and what employers are saying they're getting ready to do. Mercer also recommended that we look at a blended rate of ECI, both public and private. So that blended rate of ECI that we are using in the pay plan that we recommended is actually 4.3. It's a little higher than that. That's off the top, I'm sorry, I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I think I remember this. So it's a blend of both public and private. I think probably the number you're looking at is just public, but Mercer had recommended, because many of our jobs, we are competing both public and private, that we should look at both indices. So we are looking at a blended rate of ECI, which in this case for this pay plan we proposed was 4.3. The salary planning surveys were 3.7. That's what actually gave us our recommended rate of 4%. So the 2% merit, the 2% across the board, and then the mayor had reduced the 1%
Reduced it
across
to
the board.
1%.
The numbers, with the exception of kind of the scenario showing you how we're going to recommend pay, just full transparency going forward, all the numbers we're showing you are consistent with what is in the filed budget, but our recommendation was 2 and 2 for a total 4%.
So given that the recommendation was 2%, does the 1% looking forward, does that put us behind what competitive pay is in the market?
We want to maintain our market position, right? And so our job really is recommending appropriate pay and wages. Obviously, the mayor and the council have different funding considerations that are under yours. When we get to next year's pay plan, we want to make sure we're not eroding our position in the market. When we talk about increasing our market position, most employers are paying market at the midpoint, like step 5 median. What we are doing across all pay grades, when we talk about increasing all of our pay grades, what we are actually doing is changing to pay market at the 25th percentile or step 3 or so. And so that's why we're paying market sooner. That's what's increasing all of the pay ranges in the whole classification system. And so in this particular case, we don't want to erode that position. So to your point, we would need to accommodate if it doesn't get funded in this pay plan or only a portion of it is, we need to compensate that in the next year.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so very much, Vice Chair. And I did have one clarifying question. The handout that you all gave us said that the adjustment increases pay ranges 7 to 8% for all grades to improve market competitiveness of all jobs. Is that 7 to 8% before the merit and the across the board, or is it 7 to 8% after merit and across the board?
Keep me honest, the 7 to 8% is inclusive of the 1% across the board, but does not include the merit. The merit structure would still advance then another 2%. So if we, in our presentation, the visual slide that we had on slide 6 kind of shows you at the minimum how it's going up about 7 to 8%, and then the maximum kind of goes up about 8 or 9%. That's that whole adjusting to increase our market position to pay market sooner.
Okay, thank you. And then two more really quick questions. And colleagues, Director Darby and I met with Director Hall and her team for probably about 2 hours going over this pay plan. So in transparency, the question that I'm about to ask, I know the answer to, but I want to make sure that everyone is able to hear some of the same information. Can you speak to what it looks like for individuals to get merit pay? Are there instances where people don't get their merit? If so, how do they rectify that? And how often do people not get merit pay? You want to answer that?
I can answer that. Yeah. So for step plans, it's really pass fail. They must meet the performance expectations of their job. Every employee has a performance evaluation annually. If they do not meet the performance expectations of their job and they don't pass their evaluation, then they would have what we call an increment delay. And then they would have an opportunity in 90 days to be reevaluated and either pass and receive their step at that time, or if they do not pass, then they would not receive an increment that year and would wait until their next anniversary date to be eligible again if they pass their evaluation. Those instances are very rare. It's probably 12 to 15 employees a year out of over 6,000 employees on steps that don't get a step increment. For open range, those are all effective July 1st at the beginning of the fiscal year. They're also based on performance. Those merit increases can vary. They're budgeted at 2%, but they can vary based on performance within a range. There probably last year, there were maybe 6 out of over 3,000 open range employees who did not receive a merit increase due to a performance issue. So
Okay.
less than 20 a year.
And Madam Chair, just to clarify for the council, none of those provisions have changed. That is consistently how we've been doing performance evaluations throughout Metro for years and years and years. So those are not new provisions. Those are existing and did not change.
Okay, thank you. And then just one more quick clarifying question, just making sure that this is still correct information. Over the last 4 years, for individuals staying in the same job, we've increased wages for about 31%. That is the information that was given to me. Is that accurate?
Over the 4-year period, if they did not change a job, most employees, there was a number of employees that did change job, but job for job in the same job, employee pay over the past 4 years is just over 31%.
Okay, thank you. So just wanted to highlight that we have a commitment to paying our people, and I think that's been a focus of ours, and I think that will continue to be a focus, making sure that we're paying people fair wages. So with that, I'll go to Councilmember Soror, then Councilmember Webb, then Councilmember Gamble, and then we will start picking up people that are not on the Budget Committee. Councilmember Soror, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for the presentation and the in-depth work. And I echo Chair's sentiment about paying our people the right wages. A couple of questions. The first one could be to Mercer, and I don't know, this is just for clarification for me. Even when we use the CPI to calculate cost of living adjustment, one of the issues that we've run into in the past is that even when we're trying to bring up wages and Metro is paying as much as it could, it's still not enough to cover what's going on in the community. Now that we want to use the ECI, I can also tell you that Tennessee is not favorable to employees. It's an employer state. And with a state where minimum wage is low, where wages is low, how is that impacting those percentages? And are those percentages relative to just this area? Is there something nationally? And are we factoring the fact that wages is actually low here? Not for everybody. Metro is a good payer, but if we're doing globally, are we taking those into consideration as we're coming up with the calculation?
Yes, I think we could go back to this page again, Leslie, that you were on before. That ECI, traditionally over time has actually been higher. ECI has actually been higher overall than CPI. I think the point is that it is less volatile, and it also is a true reflection of what we're really trying to focus on when we're talking about the value of a job in the market. And that's what this reflects. So it's really reflecting what is the value of a job in a market based on the supply and demand of labor. So for example, during COVID, that kind of turned things upside down for a lot of things, right? And one of the things that it really, really impacted was the supply and demand of labor for certain jobs, because there was a lot more people on the market in certain jobs, and then there were certain other jobs that were needed much more. And so again, it was influenced by the supply and demand of labor. But it has traditionally, as you can see on these charts over the last 24 years, overall, like Leslie said, there have been some instances where it was lower, but overall, it kind of tracks with CPI, but has traditionally been higher.
We are looking
Thank you.
at the
Sorry.
national
Yes.
ECI
yes.
metric.
And what I was trying to say is, I'm not saying ECI is better than CPI. Even the CPI was not tracking with what we're seeing in the rate of growth in our city, even that's the national number. So my question is, in a situation where you're doing a calculation, whether it's ECI or CPI, in this case ECI, do you also take into mitigating factors like what is happening on the ground and not just a national average?
Do you mind if I speak a little bit to
Yes,
that?
ma'am.
Because I think it actually underscores a really important role that I really respect with regard to the mayor and council in this particular case. So we are typically looking at wage metrics for jobs throughout the market, and we're looking at, local peers, we're looking at other public sector peers, sometimes we're looking at private peers. So it really depends on the job. It depends on who we're competing with in order to get, it's that supply and demand of labor. Who we have to compete with in order to get those jobs is really going to drive the calculations on how we're setting pay for all of our jobs. But in our role as HR professionals in this government is to recommend appropriate pay based on those calculation factors, which is taking into account wages. But you bring up a really good point, which is sometimes there are other economic indicators that may be happening on a local, state, or national level that are they're real to employees in our government, but are kind of outside the purview of HR. Like we are not cost of goods and services experts, right? But part of the reason why we care so much about a sound compensation structure is because of the role and process that's outlined by Metro Charter that empowers the mayor and ultimately the council to set those funding priorities. And this structure allows council to consider any metrics, whether it's CPI or other local indicators, national indicators, state indicators, that also may be occurring so that you can increase the across the board to account for those indicators as the legislators of this body deem fit. And I feel like that's a really important role of council. It's contemplated by charter. I want to make sure that we are doing our role in recommending pay, but I also want to make sure we respect and don't tie the hands of council so that they can make those decisions when they feel like there are other metrics that need to justify increasing across the board for employees during those times too.
Thank you. And thank you for saying that. That's very important. I wanted to look at everything that we're using to make the determination and making sure. So thank you for that. The next question that I have goes after what my colleague, Councilmember Toombs was asking in the sense that I think 4% was recommended, but we're only doing 3%. Do we know the cost of that 1%? What is that difference? What does that amount to across board?
Yes, the current across the board, you guys will notice this number's been increasing because every year that we set the pay plan is the new floor of pay, right? We don't roll it back. So across the board, 1% this year is $10 million. The total cost of it, I know that there are enterprise funds, and that might be slightly less from an operating perspective, but the total cost is $10 million for 1%.
All right, I'm looking at Madam Chair. The last question that I have for you actually is a constituent question. And the question was that when this presentation was initially made to the Civil Service Commission, the recommendation was that the minimum or the range would be from 4% to 11%. So now we have 3% to 9%. So the question is, why did they change after the adoption of the civil service?
You know what, first of all, the 1% rolled down because our recommendation has not changed, right? Our recommendation has been made to the Civil Service Commission. That's our role. That has not changed. Part of the roll down, at least from the 4 to 3, is because of the reduction in the filed budget. I do think, Leslie, would you go to the trades and labor percentage slide? That might have been maybe part of a slight communication delta on our end. We communicated because in our change announcement, we said, that people can expect 3 to 9. Most people, that is the case. There are a handful of people that are above that. And so that may be in an attempt not to confuse some of the folks in the consolidated trades and labor, depending on what schedule you're in the consolidation. There are populations that are going to get north of that, but I think in the more global communication, we may have probably didn't differentiate that accordingly. But these are real numbers that have been even adjusted minus the 1% across the board. So we do have some folks that are going to be receiving north of that 9%. And so I apologize, that's probably a more global communication delta, but these are the actual percentages, even with the 1% reduction.
No apology necessary. We just wanted the clarification so that people are not confused as to whether it changed. So thank you for that.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Sore. And the conversation kind of led to something that I did want to highlight as well. I have a lot of notes up here about our previous conversation. There's nothing that precludes civil service, the mayor, or the council from increasing the across the board when CPI is greater than ECI. So we do still have the flexibility, and there's nothing that stops us from increasing it at this time. So just for the sake of transparency, if we can figure out, working with finance and administration, if we can figure out how to do the 1% to get us to 4%, that is what my intention is. So just so that y'all know that is what I'm working on, that is something that I'm looking at. So I don't like to make promises because we're still delving in the numbers, so I can't say for certain it's going to happen, but that is what my intentions are, just so the committee knows and that, the people that are watching know what it is that I'm thinking of and what I'm trying to do. So, Councilmember Webb, you're recognized.
Thank y'all for being here. Thank you, Chair, for what you just said, for being such a great civil servant supporter. I have a couple of questions. Data is only as good as what we're comparing it to. What other counties or who did y'all compare us to? Civil service.
So our public sector peers are approved by the Civil Service Commission. We have
It's about 24-ish cities, plus a lot of our surrounding counties.
because of
that
the
we
local market
use.
data. I know this is unfair to ask you right off the top of your head. Can you talk about I'm going to ask Leah, can you talk a little bit about the types of indices that you look at when we are recommending peer cities for our consideration?
Yeah, so what we did when we look at peer cities is, we start with what you've been comparing yourselves to. So we want to make sure we validate that first. So to the extent we can keep the peer group consistent, that is a goal, because then year over year, just like the change in cost of labor, then year over year, how things are actually changing. So we do start with the peers you've been looking at in the past. And then also from that, we recommend, there were some that we recommended that you remove from the list, and there were some that we recommend that you add to the list. And it's primarily based on, housing prices, what type of city you have, right? Do you have large events that come to the city? Are you a large conference city? So we look at those kinds of things, kind of the influx and the outflux of population, not just consistent population in terms of residences, crime rate. So there's a lot of different factors that we take into account when we recommend peers to be potentially removed that you've been looking at, and peers to be added to the peer list.
Can y'all share the list with us? Give it to Margaret to share on the SharePoint so we can actually see what we compared with. Second of all, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the 31%. So you're saying if employees started 4 years ago at 20,000, right now after 4 years they're going to be at 26,000.
I'm assuming your math is correct because I'm not that quick. But yes, I mean,
Okay.
30, if job to job,
Job to job.
like full disclosure, The average employee compensation is well north of that because not everybody stayed job to job. But and there are others that maybe had a market adjustment that would have driven that higher. But if they were no market adjustments, just looking at the pay increases that have been granted, total pay increases over the past 4 years, 8%, 7.5%, 9%, 7%, that is the total wage growth that happened job for job, no other adjustments. But there are a number of other adjustments that may have happened either for that job or if they were promoted or they changed jobs. So the average pay increase for most Metro employees is north of the 31%, but job to job, that is right.
Okay, my son started 4 years ago. I just want to make sure he's getting his fair share on the fire department. Okay, so my last question is, the feedback from the civil servant side has not been positive on the pay plan change. So what I would like for one of you great ladies to do, if you could, take like a fireman's pay, policeman's pay, and trade and labor pay, and put it on the old pay plan of where it would be through the steps, and then compare it to the new pay plan, because really that's the only way that we can. I think they're caught up in the merit, because their merit a fireman's merit has been 3%, and now we're giving them 2%. So in their eyes, no matter what you tell them, we're taking 1% away from them. Okay, so I would like to see a comparison for each 3 of those departments. So I think if it's a better pay plan, then the new pay plan is going to be higher every step of the way.
Yes.
That's just what I would like to see, if y'all could share that on the SharePoint. Thank you.
We'd be happy to.
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing up the SharePoint, Councilmember Webb. So colleagues, this presentation, as well as every presentation that we have received, is available on the FY26 budget documents SharePoint located on the council resources page on nashville.gov. So thank you for bringing that up, Councilmember. The next person we have in queue is Councilmember Gamble. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this valuable, detailed information. Appreciate the evaluation of the pay plan, badly needed. So it's nice that it has been completed. Most of my questions have been answered. So just for clarification, for my clarification and for the viewing public, is the funding for the pay range increases and step increases in the mayor's recommended budget?
Yes. Everything that, like any of the market adjustments, the implementation to get, because many employees are getting much more than that to implement to the schedule, the 2% merit for eligible employees, and then 1% across the board. So that is all in the mayor's filed budget.
Right. I got the merit and the across the board, but just making sure that the
Yes.
range increases that you all are recommending, as well as the step increases, are all in there as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gamble. And I did want to clarify too, and I know Director Hall said it, but Civil Service recommended the 2% across the board, and the current budget is funding it at 1% across the board. So just making sure that was transparent for everybody. The next we have, would anyone else from the committee like to be recognized? All right, seeing none, we're going to go to non-committee members. Councilmember Coopin, followed by Councilmember Nash. Councilmember Coopin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me, even though I'm not on the committee, and thank you to all of y'all up front for working so hard on this and doing the studies and the research and presenting. Really appreciate it. Pardon my lack of math knowledge here. Bear with me. But ECI versus CPI. So it sounds like ECI looks at cost of labor effectively, and CPI looks at cost of living. And then those are used to make the recommendation to civil service, and then civil service makes recommendation to mayor and council. If some years ECI is higher, some years CPI is higher, why not use both of those indicators to come up and use, for example, the higher of the two to make the recommendation, so that when cost of goods is going up more than cost of labor, we're compensating for cost of goods, and then cost of labor is going up more than cost of goods, right? Does that make sense? Like, why would you not use a hybrid model?
Mostly because we're wage experts. So ECI is total wage growth. Like when ECI is looking at actual total wage growth, it is looking at all employers, and it doesn't care if it's merit, across the board, bonuses, whatever the total wage growth is what ECI is tracking. So what we want to do is meet or exceed that, certainly as we are trying to be in an increased market position. So our job is to recommend wages, But CPI is the cost of goods and services, something we are not necessarily experts in. But I think at times does play a role. And I feel like that is really a role of consideration for funding that I believe that the mayor, finance director, and the council by Metro Charter, that's really something that you guys get to consider as part of an additional funding component. There have been times when a mayor or you guys know, you guys have recommended across the board's hire several years. Sometimes we have a mayor that will recommend an across the board above even what we recommend. But part of it is we are wage experts. That our job is to recommend appropriate pay. And so using CPI as a metric doesn't really track wages. It checks the cost of goods and services. But full disclosure, we want a structure that empowers all of those people in the process to make additional considerations, determinations, and funding decisions to go above that when any of those conditions exist. And that's part of us trying to give a responsible structure, is to empower all of those people in those roles, including you all, to make that final decision on funding.
Got it. So it sounds like ECI is encompassing of what it costs to live because someone should be paying someone commensurate with that.
Over time, that's what it should be. I mean, because at some point, people won't do the jobs because they can't afford to be there or they're not willing to do it. So,
And if ECI is us looking at what other people are paying, and then those other markets are probably using the same metric, looking at what other people, don't we end up in sort of a feedback loop in the sense that, like, if Nashville's looking at Memphis and then Memphis is looking at Nashville and we're looking at each other? And again, that's my ignorance about the economics of all this.
I mean, definitely you are included in those numbers. However, because we're looking at a national level, there are thousands and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of employers in there. So, you know, someone who's reporting to that is a small part of the data set. And so, you know, another thing, so yes, you're in there. I see what you're saying. You're kind of comparing yourself to yourself, but on a very large data set, you know, one employer is a very small piece of that. Another thing I'll say is that the compensation planning surveys have traditionally been published on an annual basis. And since COVID, they have been published more frequently, as frequently as quarterly, and sometimes even more frequent than that. And it's not, you know, kind of a new publication saying, this is a fact of what people are going to pay, but it is a look back of this was the last actual increase, you know, for organizations that have implemented an increase. And this is what we're projecting that they will do next. And us, as well as others that do what we do, and these associations that I mentioned are publishing this information much more frequently now. So I think that that's a very positive thing too. And I think as the world changes, of course, it's only going to become more and more frequent and more real-time data than something that was published, you know, potentially 6, 7, 8, 9 months ago.
Thank you. And last question, Chair. You know, when we look at pay plans and look at being competitive, and we look at other cities where it feels to me from certain kind of spot things I've looked at that we're still behind, even with these increases, we might still be behind. So are there ways to kind of catch us up if there are other cities that are paying more? Does this ECI index, I guess, like evaluate every year how far behind we are? Or how does that work on a long run to get us kind of caught up to the market?
So when we do our pay studies, as soon as we implement this one, we'll be studying for next year. And we do look at individual jobs also, which are not necessarily going to we wouldn't get information on a particular job from that aggregate ECI data. We would look at peer cities. We would look at the published surveys we have that have pay data specific to those types of jobs and recommend individualized changes for those jobs for future pay plans. So we would be looking at individual jobs. If there's hot jobs that, you know, need more of an adjustment than just that general across the board increase, we would address that in the pay plans just on an ongoing basis.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cooper. And can you all clarify, because I think that just raised a really interesting point, Councilmember. Are we behind peer cities when it comes to pay?
I mean, the answer is no. when you're talking about aggregated data, ECI is a very large data set again. When we do these studies, we are rolling up results to provide you with these summaries. However, we're doing, as Leslie mentioned, we're doing job by job comparisons. And so we might actually see that some jobs are being paid more behind market than others. I won't say behind market because that might not be the truth. More behind market than others. And there might be jobs that are being paid more high than market than others. And so we really do have to look at it at a job by job basis. So that's when on an annual basis, you might actually suggest a higher increase for one job or one career pathway than others. So that's something that the compensation team, I will say from doing this for many, many years, has done an amazing job of. It's something that we take a deep dive look at when we're doing any of these studies. So what we've done here is really look at the pay plan and make sure that we're aligning the entire pay plan to market. But on an ongoing basis annually, you still have to look at those job by job to make sure that one job has not kind of jumped higher in value in the market because of supply and demand. And if it has, you might need to actually regrade it, put it in a grade higher than it was before. But I would say, are you behind market? Absolutely not. I would say no.
Okay.
No.
Thank you. I just wanted to, that flagged it, and I just wanted to make sure that we got that information on the record. It's my understanding that Metro has been exceeding both private and public sector over the last few years when it comes to our wage growth. So I just want to make sure that we're putting the information that we're putting out, and the HR people are nodding their head, yes, that's a fact. So I just want to make sure that when we are considering everything, the information that we're putting out is rooted in the facts. So, Councilmember Nash, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I must admit, I'm having deja vu. I'm having flashback. I've been on both sides of the table in these discussions, no, I look historically. When I came on, we had 6 steps, and then we got some more consultants, and we went to 10, and then we've gone to 15, and we went back to 10. It all depends what consultant you hire, what year, what pay plan we're in. I suspect a couple of years, and now we do another one, we'll have a wholly different looking structure maybe. And that's probably fair because things change. But it was a simple pay plan when I came on, in that we had our step, and we got the step without fail. And then there was a COLA, and sometimes we didn't get a COLA, even if this COLA went up, because the city couldn't afford it at the time. And then, as she mentioned, occasionally we'd have a classification that maybe computer folks were more expensive, or a police officer is more expensive, and we would do what we call a reclassification. This has become a lot more complicated than that, for sure. I do appreciate in 2008, when we went through the Great Recession, that really impacted our pay plan. That's when we, for the first time in the history of Metro, we didn't pay steps. And we got into that reverse slotting. And so I applaud you in this pay plan for addressing that issue. I hope we won't ever have to freeze the pay steps again. But addressing the reverse slotting and that compression, I think, is a big piece of making this a fairer pay plan. Certainly, I think where does a 15 or 20-year employee slot in? Will they instantly go to the top?
The 15 to 20-year employee right now has been sitting for 5 or 10 years at step 10, getting no merit increases. So they will start getting merit again for the first time. So employees that are at step 10 would start receiving merit again. I mean, assumedly under that scenario.
Yeah. When I looked at the trades and labor chart that you had, where we only have 5 employees, 4 employees, 2 employees, that indicates to me that we're having a lot of people leave maybe after that 5 or 6 years. Is that not the case?
No, actually, this is one of these that's definitely, I would say and I don't want to overstep my bounds, so Leslie, you can jump in whenever you want, but I would say as a pay scale, they were on 5 steps for a very long time until
2023, 22 or 23, just a few years ago.
this has actually been one of our, like, honestly, one of our biggest focuses as far as trying to find competitive wages for. This has become a very competitive industry because there's not as many people that are going through skilled trades. So it has actually been one of our harder ones. But the reason why you see less people in those is that just a couple of years ago, they went from a 5-step plan to a 10-step plan.
They also, every trades job was upgraded at least 2 pay grades. And in our former slotting method, they all got the across-the-board increase and went to a step in the new grade closest to that. So there was a lot of compression in trades. So they all slotted to step 1, 2, 3 that year. And now they're just approaching that step 5 or 6. But we do not have many trades employees in those higher steps now because of the compression from the earlier upgrades.
I was glad to hear that it's kind of a game. I think when you talk about the consumer price index versus the ECI, it's obviously an indication, both of them, of where wages, cost of living might be going, and as we as a city, how we want to address it and how much we can afford to address it. It really becomes the issue. So that's more in the financial realm than it is in the recruitment and retention, maybe. And then let's see, obviously it's always size of department often and location in the country. I used to, when I was negotiating, the South always had lower wage rates. Councilmember Suara mentioned that. And it's certainly a big city department, and we're getting bigger and bigger. I'm going to say maybe the city total, but the metropolitan area, it certainly affects, as you mentioned, with festivals, and there's always something going on downtown, all kinds of tourists and the like. I would just close. I know THP has got a great pay plan coming. They're outstrapping us, I think, in many ways in salary. Hendersonville just got big pay increase. Smyrna's now very competitive with us, and I think we've still got to do more in the recruit retention, at least for the police department. I'm focusing on it, so forgive me. But I do appreciate the fact that we've maintained a base wage of the $20, and we keep our eye on that. I think that's important too.
I think it's really important for next year. The next year numbers, what I like about the increased pay ranges under this structure versus the status quo is we're taking a meaningful step towards addressing what is a fast-growing living wage in our community. It's a major step forward. If we were staying in our current status quo, our plans are, in our status quo, are priced at $20.09. But that living wage number, can you go back to living wage page? We're looking at a blended rate, but last year's rate was $23. Almost 24, and it's higher for 25. So that number, that 17 is going to drop, and we're making a meaningful step forward. Under the current plans, we've got, $20.09, but under this new proposed pay plan with all of the pay ranges going up across the board, and that's important, it really starts to alleviate and make a meaningful step towards that living wage and take compression off of that. Because when we raise up the lowest part, it has impacts, tsunami impacts through the whole pay plan, because they report to individuals who are above them, and those people report to individuals. And so depending on how big that impact is on the bottom, can have a real costly ripple effect across the whole government, because you don't want to create pay inequities where you've got people that are making more than the people they report to. And so you've got to index that up quite a bit. So what I really like about this pay structure is as we've increased the pay ranges across all of that, we've alleviated the compression across the entire pay plan and taken a really meaningful step towards what is a fast-growing living wage number that we are going to have to also address next year.
And one other thing, I do question the combination or the blending of step raise and the across the board that you're doing here. I think the more honest way to address it and simpler way to address it from an employee standpoint is here's your step raise. And as the city looks at this, what we can afford for across the board, again, it just simplifies it. It looks to me anyway, a little less gamey, but understand we're in new territory and maybe have to work through some of this, see how it works.
Thank you, Councilmember Nash. I did not see anyone else that wanted to be recognized. I just have one question and one thought. We talked about this some last year, and you may not have the numbers in front of you. So if you don't have the numbers in front of you, if you could get those to us. But we know, to Councilmember Nash's point, he talked about there were some years in the past where steps were frozen. There were years in the past where the COLA was frozen. Can you speak to what steps have been taken to try to make employees whole from those periods of time? And I just want to acknowledge that there's no way to completely make them whole, because if you didn't get something one year, even if you make up for it the next year, you still didn't get it the year before. So that is, challenging for people that are looking to get those yearly increases to maintain their, personal budgets. But can you all speak to how we have addressed that?
The pay growth slide.
And secondly, on that same thought, there was a slide you all created for us last year, and that's kind of what I'm speaking to as well. So you could speak to this, but also there's a slide that you all created last year that looked at the COLAs that we have been given over the last few years, that may be in last year's data.
Back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We can go farther back, and I think, to your point, Chair, a lot of that, I think, has been addressed through steps that the council's taken over the past couple of years. If you'll notice in 2021, that merit is double. That was a double step year. So people got 2 steps in 2021, and then continuing to have pretty substantial COLAs that outpace even, if you look at the ECI total, right, over that same period, ECI, which is total wages for all other employers, over that same since 2019 is 23.2%. But the total wage growth, apples to apples, for metropolitan government employees is 38.5 over that same time frame. So there definitely was an additional step taken by council in 2021 that actually doubled up steps for employees. And then the ongoing commitment to across the boards that have been given over the last several years. But we can go back and show you like a deeper one that we had done, I think, from last year, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And then the last thing that I wanted to just highlight, because I know this tends to come up every year when we're looking at the budget and we're trying to figure out how we can make things work. One question that always comes up is about partially funding something, which I know that we can't partially fund it, but I just wanted to get it on the record for any colleagues who may be thinking this. Sometimes it'll come up and say, well, can we just pay more for the people that make under 100,000, or can we give them a bigger across the board if they make, between this amount and this amount? And that is not something that we are able to do. The changes that we make have to be uniform. So we can say we're giving an extra 1% across the board, or you can say we're going down by 1% across the board, but you can't say we're just going to give extra money to steps 0 through 5, or we're just going to give extra money from steps 5 to 10. We can't make adjustments. The new pay plan, if it has to be consistent across the board. I was about to get real deep, Shannon, but I'm not going to, I pull myself back. But it has to be consistent. So for anyone who may have any ideas of like, why can't we just give the lowest paid people more money? We can't. So we can only do it across the board for everyone at an even rate. Is that correct, Director Hall?
Yes, and a lot of that language is outlined in the Metro Charter. It gives different roles and responsibilities for the Director of Personnel, the Civil Service Commission, the Finance Director, the Mayor, and then the Council. And For the mayor and finance director, there is very specific language that they can't alter or destroy the relationship between the grades, I think off the top of my head is that language. And then for the council, the language is can only be modified by uniform adjustment. And so any adjustment that you make would have to have a uniform adjustment no matter what that adjustment is. So when you're contemplating that, that has typically been limited just to and across the board. Doing other components that would change parts of the plan, part of the structure of the plan, may not yield a uniform adjustment, even if on its face it looks like it up front. So, for example, if you were to increase merit, that would look like a uniform adjustment because you would just be increasing 1% of merit, except that it would alter the pay ranges in a way that would not yield a uniform adjustment. And so as a result of that, that couldn't happen. So the language that is part of the reason why we care so much about having a structurally sound pay plan structure, the merit-based structure, is because it really puts the finance director, the mayor, and the council in a position where they have to fund the merit of the pay plan or not fund the merit. But where you really get discretionary authority is in that across the board. So we've created a structure that allows you to really empower in that role, that discretion. I also want to create conditions because there is economic volatility. There has been economic volatility in the recent past with the pandemic. There is economic volatility that is on the horizon or is currently happening now in the federal government. And I want to create conditions where if everything went awry, that council could their very best try to fund the merit-based portion of the pay plan, right? Councilmember Nash mentioned this, and I lived through the 4 years when we didn't have pay plans funded, and I was in a much lower paid position living paycheck to paycheck. So I remember how that felt. And then I was very grateful to the last mayor who held the line and didn't do layoffs when COVID happened, but we didn't then fund merit again. I want to create conditions that ensure that our base merit pay plan, which you guys don't get the discretionary authority because of that language in the code, that you can fund that every single year. We have a merit-based structure. I want employees to get merit every year. And then I want to empower the finance director, the mayor, and the council that if they want to do additional across the boards, that they're empowered to do so within their legislative authority outlined in the charter. There is a method to all of this, and it's really meant to respect the roles and some of the confines that are outlined by charter for all of your roles.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Director Hall. Thank you, ladies, collectively for being here for this presentation. Thank you for all of the work that y'all have done to advocate for fair and just compensation and to also educate us on this pay plan. Colleagues, we meet tomorrow in the jury assembly room downstairs. And tomorrow we will begin looking at the wish list. And with that, our meeting is adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.